Welcome back to Strange New Worlds, a science and Star Trek podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wong. We are only at the dawn of humanity's space age. What will our future in space look like? Star Trek gives us one vision, a galactic federation of planets seeking peace and prosperity, knowledge and wisdom. Other science fiction shows offer their own takes, but these are all, at best, just guesses. What space exploration will actually look like in the long term is not written in stone, and quite likely up to us to decide. That's what Professor Jason Kaufman explores in a trio of papers we'll discuss on Strange New Worlds today. Jason is a professor of educational leadership and director of the Institutional Review Board at Minnesota State University, Mankato, and he's a licensed psychologist. Jason's writing focuses on leadership development on the one hand and space policy on the other. He joined us on Strange New Worlds back in episode 172 to talk about the former interest, leadership. And today, he beams back aboard to discuss the latter. Let me read you the titles of the three papers we'll be discussing today. An Interplanetary Land Ethic, Artemis and an Environmentally Sustainable Future Beyond Earth, A Case for Nature in Long-Haul Space Exploration. In these three papers, Jason challenges conventional views about the nature of space exploration and our relationship to the nature that we will encounter in space, or leave behind on Earth when we venture toward the stars. At the end of this podcast, Jason and I will also discuss his latest book, co-edited with Aaron Peterson, titled Second Star to the Right, Essays on Leadership and Star Trek. We have a lot to talk about, so without further ado, engage. Jason Kaufman, welcome back to Strange New Worlds.
Thanks so much for having me back, Mike.
It's always a pleasure to speak to you, and today I'm really excited to talk about a trio of papers that you wrote surrounding the themes of human space exploration, sustainable futures, and our relationship to nature. And I'll link to all of these papers in the show notes so that our audience can take a deeper dive if they wish. But before we dive into the contents of those papers, I just have to ask how you got started thinking about and writing about these topics. I mean, you're a professor of educational leadership, and you're a licensed psychologist. So how did you start writing about space exploration, sustainable futures, and a relationship to nature?
Yeah, man, what a great loaded question. First of all, thanks so much for having me back. You know your podcast is one of my absolute favorites, and it's just flattering to be here. And I love, like you said, I loved any chance I get to talk to you or read any of your stuff. But in terms of how I got onto this broader topic in general, astronomy was my first love. I just remember this exceptionally clearly back to kindergarten to first grade. I remember presenting on the planets in elementary school, and this dates me a bit, and I did not realize this at the time, but those were in the early days of the Voyager mission.
Okay.
And so I couldn't appreciate as a small child how new the data and the books and the images and even the artist conceptions were. As far as I knew, we'd always known this stuff because I was in elementary school.
Yeah.
But this was like in the very, very early 80s. So I mean, this was what Voyager was launched 79, give or take.
Yeah, late 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. So this was, Voyager 1 and 2, they were literally just getting to the outer solar system. And I was just deeply in love. And that never left me, but for any number of reasons, my path just took me elsewhere. I never had the math chops to do astronomy or astrophysics. And honestly, when I encountered psychology as a discipline, I just fell like even deeper in love, like just the coolest thing ever. And I'm obviously, like you are with your stuff, totally biased on this note. But I got started with that, and then it was always just in the background. Fast forward decades later, my colleague Andy Lenartz out at Gateway Community College in Phoenix, who's a dear friend and a wonderful colleague. He and I met, of all things, at a conference. Get this, in January of 20, like
Ooh,
right minutes before the pandemic shut down the world.
wow.
Like talk about serendipity. And we just hit it off. We were both presenting at this teaching conference on similar nature-based and mind-body based topics. And it just kind of effloresced from that. I mean, truly. And so we started designing studies where we would take people out into nature and try to help them be better, like more whole people, psychologically healthier, hopefully physically healthier. We haven't measured that yet, but we know what the research suggests. And then I kid you not, one day I had flown out to Phoenix about 6 months before the first phase of that ongoing study, and we were driving up to check out our site near Prescott. Because, taking humans to the woods and IRBs, like this takes a lot of logistics,
Hmm.
right? And so everything we do for these studies, it's like literally a year of planning just to get the funding. And so God, I remember so clearly. We're driving out. I'm from the upper Midwest, and here I am in this amazing desert, and I just literally got to see my first rattlesnake. So this is great.
Yeah.
And we're heading to the site, and we cross this like tiny, tiny bridge that looks like it should be a footbridge, but cars go over it. And I turned to Andy and my mind's going, and I'm like, okay, I have a really stupid idea, but this has been on my mind for a while. I just need to say it out loud. And then you can smile and nod and pat me on the head, and I can let this go. But I just have to verbalize this so that you can tell me why my thinking is so off the mark. And that initial conversation became this series of papers over several years.
Wow. I love that origin story. As somebody who also didn't grow up near the desert, whenever I travel to Arizona or even just fly over that region of the world, I
Yes.
feel like this is a different planet.
Yeah, it's starkly beautiful, especially from the air.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Wow. So, Jason, I'd like to start with your paper titled An Interplanetary Land Ethic, where you write that, quote, nature is the foundation of human welfare, and we must view it with a sense of humility that is both intellectual and cultural, end quote. And reading your past work, especially on leadership, I know that
Yeah.
you're a big fan of humility and
Yeah.
empathy in leadership. What does this kind of intellectual and cultural humility toward nature mean to you, Jason?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question, Mike. So this paper was the direct outgrowth of that conversation that started on that bridge. I just been reading a lot of philosophical as well as some policy works on like the land ethic, on nature, on protectionism, things like that. And I mean, I think any of us who spent any significant time in nature, if you're not humbled at some points, you're not paying attention. No matter like how hardcore you might want to be in your gear and your backpacking, whatever, ultimately that's not what gives us the benefit of being out there, wherever there is. And it just, as we were gearing up for our other ongoing study, I just kept looking up at the stars. I kept looking up at the moon, and it just kept resonating with me of, you know, my God, we are about to embark. So have to think this was published in 22, and so like Artemis as a federal program was really just kind of gearing up. SpaceX hadn't had any of their major successes yet with Starship, but we knew where that was going. There was a lot going on in terms of eventual space flight, return to the moon, maybe going out to Mars. Lots of people writing about it, lots of punditry. And I just kept thinking, okay, but we've already seriously damaged our home planet.
Hmm.
And the planet will outlast us, right? Whatever happens, we are part of, look who I'm talking to. We are part of such a bigger ecosystem, and I think humanity almost invariably forgets, including way too many of us in the sciences, that, oh, wait, we've been around for 2 to 300,000 years as a species, right? We discovered fire like yesterday, and now we have the internet. And by the way, that suggests, based on all the hominids, that we're probably not going to last too much longer in a large scale perspective unless we really mend our ways. And you can't start thinking like that and then not think about, oh, and we're going to put our flags back on the moon and on Mars. And I've always, and this is wishful thinking maybe, but I've always just assumed we would eventually become an interstellar species. And I was reading a bunch of the papers by people like Charles Cockle, who have really pioneered this notion of like interplanetary parks, like
Hmm.
national parks, if you will, or interplanetary parks on Mars and whatnot. And I think that's a brilliant idea. And I just thought, oh man, no one's writing about this, but I'm confident that there are lots of us thinking about it. And so we thought, okay, let's just take a crack at it. And as people who are deeply immersed in like eco psychology and mind body approaches in nature, let's just dip our toe in that cosmic, ocean, as Sagan would have said, and let's just explore what would this look like? What might this look like a century from now, 2 centuries from now, when we are at the precipice of screwing up another planet?
And you suggest in this paper that we might treat nature as a kind of wilderness, places that we visit temporarily but do not remain
Yeah,
permanently, and that we
yeah,
might establish, as you mentioned, Charlie Cockle's idea of planetary parks, similar in style to the way that the US manages national parks.
yeah.
So, Jason, could you paint a picture in my mind of a planetary park that you'd like to visit, and what would your visit, your vacation there be like?
Oh my God. I would like to visit, Mike, literally any planetary park on any one of our planets. I mean, I would not be choosy. I will say though, um, I have always loved the moon.
Hmm.
And I very, very much want us to go back there. Not just so that in 400 years we can see the lights of, Armstrong City, but I would like us to go back there. I think there's so much there for us. I would love to wander the surface of the moon,
Yeah.
right? See the protected sites of the U.S. missions, of the dates me, the USSR missions, of the inevitable China missions in
Hmm.
just a few more years. And then the other one that would be highest on my list, because I don't consider myself old, but I truly never thought I would live to see this. I would love to walk the surface of Pluto to
Ooh.
see such magnificent variety and topography and even atmosphere. I mean,
Yeah.
how is this even possible? To
Right.
just be able to go there at the very edge, it'll always be Planet Nine in my mind. I know that's highly debated, but to just walk that, or in that case, probably hop it or shuffle,
Hmm.
I to see to just hike in the ice mountains. I think that would be about as remarkable as anything I could possibly imagine, probably more so.
Hmm.
And then it would be protected, so that would mean wherever we were, these were designated areas to preserve the grandeur. And I would argue, right, kind of the sacredness and the meaning of those spaces, not in spite of, but alongside of any colonization, exploration, industrialization. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. I think they just have to be complementary magisteria, done well.
I love how you gave two examples there. One focusing mostly on the natural beauty of Pluto, this rugged, diverse landscape made of various kinds of ices. And then also this example with our moon that is more anthropological in essence, where you want to go and visit the historical sites of the first US, USSR, and China missions to the moon. I thought that's a very interesting answer.
Sign me up, Mike. Oh my God.
All right. Speaking of the moon, let's now talk about your paper that's titled Artemis and an Environmentally Sustainable Future Beyond Earth. So, again, we've already mentioned the Artemis program.
Yeah.
It's a NASA program meant to return humans to the moon for the first time since the 1970s. And it's a really exciting endeavor, but it's also one that kind of reminds us of how wrapped up in geopolitics space
Yeah.
exploration can be. Many people say that we are now in a new space race. So, Jason, what are your feelings surrounding Artemis and this particular moment in the history of human space exploration?
I remain by choice optimistic for the long term. I am not particularly sanguine. Again, you know, I was I mean I had to contextualize it because I think it helps to understand I was born just a couple years after Apollo ended as a mission. Like I have a black box of mission patches from when I was a kid, like what mattered to me. So like the space shuttle program, oh my God. I mean, Mike, that was going to keep us in space and not just in orbit. And like Skylab and then Space Lab. All of these things were so remarkable. And I remember so clearly and viscerally as an adolescent, young adolescent, when Space Station Freedom was faltering, which would eventually become the ISS.
Mhm.
But I remember when that wasn't happening. And so, I mean, the space race had all kinds of very problematic elements, to put it gently, but it helped to unify the country and we got it done. And we got to space, we got to the moon, and we did all of these things on less processing power than either of us have in our phones
Yeah.
by at least two orders of magnitude.
Hmm.
And so if we can do that, then like where are we? I am I'm really bothered by where we are not
Mm.
in terms of space exploration and humanity's, to me, inevitable exploration of the stars and becoming so much more of a species or whatever comes of us than we can be right now. That said, with this paper, Artemis an environmentally sustainable future, right? That was like that just followed right on this first one because it's like, oh my God, Artemis is actually going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, so at the time in 2022, how quaint, but in 2022, it seemed like, oh, we actually have to get a rush on some of these ideas because we're going to be going now, ha ha ha, Artemis 2 slightly delayed, Artemis 3 slightly more delayed, and now there's no mission architecture for anything else, really. Like I'm all for the privatization of space and space exploration. I think, the authors like Bova and others had been writing about that since the 70s and 80s. I think it has to be. But when major nations who are intellectual and scientific powerhouses, like but not limited to the US, when they give up their foothold, no pun intended, when they stop valuing, and when society stops valuing science and knowledge and exploration, then these things happen and we don't continue to evolve literally and figuratively as a species.
So, another thing you do in this paper is you think very critically about the notion of colonizing outer space.
Mhm.
Jason, why is it so important to question the paradigm of colonization, which we see so often across science fiction, including in Star Trek?
There's a loaded question these days, huh? And it's a really good one, and it's a really important one, and it's one like we really. I know I wrestled with it when we were working on this paper and the other one of what do we call this? And so I'm just going to be really candid, and I say this as someone. I think we've gone as a society a bit too carried away in terms of language and what's permissible and what's not permissible.
Hmm.
And I say this as someone who has taught graduate level critical race theory,
Hmm.
right? I mean, I think though I like to take the middle path on most things. And so I think for many people and especially for too many peoples in this country, in the States and beyond, colonization is a pretty dirty word, and that's been earned because of European colonization. However, if you look then, and you know this better than I do, if and most of your readers probably do too, if you look at the history of the concept and the term of human colonization of space, it's always been predicated on exploration, honestly, recognition of nature, the assumption that there aren't peoples out there when we're going. Of course, that's a very comfortable set of assumptions that's always gotten this species in trouble. So I think like in my mind, colonization is exploration, but the reality is it's more than that. And we don't, in our language, have a better term for it. So I think colonization is an inherently problematic term, and we need a better one that can somehow say, we're going out with humility and sensitivity, right? It's that whole, we're going to go out to the just second star to the right, follow it till morning, we'll see what we see, and we're going to make not just intelligent, but wise choices. And if we discover life, and man, I hope we do, then we're not going to repeat the mistakes of our shared ancestral past. Because like it or not, we're all just humans. Some days I feel better about that than other days. But it's a shared past, and there's never been a society or culture that has gotten around this. So I apologize because that's actually not a good answer at all, but I think it's honest. I don't know what better to call it.
No, that's great. And maybe it's just one of those cases where we as a community need to find a completely new word to describe a completely new way of being or interacting with
Right.
the natural world, because we are literally stepping out
Yeah.
into the unknown and encountering things we'll have never encountered before as a species.
Hmm.
And speaking of encountering and interacting with the natural worlds, in this paper, you write that thinking about sustainable futures in space is an opportunity to rethink the way that we interact with nature, not just in space, but also here on Earth. And that in particular, we should try to cultivate and develop, again, this empathy for nature. So, Jason, tell me more about what you envision when you think about people cultivating empathy for nature. What does that actually look like?
I think wherever we are, whether we're in the forest or in the desert or in the ocean or on the surface of Pluto, I think it's largely predicated by exposure. I
Hmm.
don't mean exposure like poof, no more air, but I think exposure to natural environments, right? Research is so clear over the past few decades that exposure to nature, and it can be like deep wilderness, like up here in Minnesota in the far north woods and the Boundary Waters, but it can also be in urban parks where there's a lot of tree cover. Research is abundantly clear that any type of exposure to nature for any real period of time, probably as little as 15 to 20 minutes at a time, as long as it is, if not regular, then at least repeated, it confers benefits. It confers psychological benefits in terms of improved thinking, improved creativity, improved emotion regulation, albeit at a low level. Like most of these interactions with nature, you're not going to walk out and th say like, "Whoa, I just came up with a paper." Although, sometimes that happens. But at a cumulative level, this makes a difference. We also know that nature has really lovely influences on physiological health indirectly through all of those psychological elements and behavioral elements I mentioned, and also directly. And we don't understand that as well yet, but exposure to phytoncides, right? Like when you are wandering among cedar, fir, things like that, if you've ever deeply inhaled and it's good air, what you're smelling, those active plant chemicals somehow have a direct effect on our functioning physiologically, on immune functioning, etc. Now, that said, one of the biggest questions that remains in all of this area of study is, and I don't care what anyone says, because the research is not there, and the honest scientists are saying, look, here's our best guess, but it's kind of like early days. It's very early days. We don't have a good conception of the dose response relationship. We simply do not know how much of what type of nature exposure for whom, when, will result in this level or type of effect.
Hmm.
It's kind of, and that matters,
Yeah.
right? Like we've got all this nonsense about acetaminophen right now, right? Knowing these things matters, especially if we're going to leverage this, like for your question of, okay, so how does one develop humility or empathy in nature? And we don't know how much. And that's going to change per person over time, like any intervention or medication. But at the end of the day, it's just about regular or at least repeated exposure, right? One of the earliest studies by Ulrich and others back in the 80s demonstrated a really clever design too for being able to like not do it experimentally, but still essentially being able to claim causality that simply healing in a hospital room with a window looking out onto the trees pretty convincingly confers more rapid wound healing
Wow.
than having a hospital window that like has a brick wall in the distance. I mean, think about that for a sec. So we know this matters. I think the more you're in nature, whether it's a park or something grander, if you can just take out the earbuds, if you can put away the phone and just be in nature and hear the birds, hear the animals, hear the wind in the leaves, whatever is endemic to your locale, it's effortless, not effortful. That humility, that empathy will come, especially if on the walk or drive home, then you maybe think about it for a few minutes.
Yeah, that reflection and
Hmm.
also
Hmm.
the active engagement with
Right.
the natural world. You know, you're not just like passing through it to take a
Hmm.
picture of it and then post it to your Instagram or whatever. It is actually being there, present with
Hmm.
it. I heard Robin Wall Kimmerer, the
Yeah.
famous botanist and ecologist and writer, speak about how there need to be more places for us to really engage
Hmm.
actively with nature, like
Hmm.
you know, the act of picking berries. It's not just like walking through, you know, a berry patch, but you're actually taking and giving to nature. You know, maybe you're going to plant some berry seeds for the next harvest or something like that as well. And that this helps us cultivate that relationship to the natural
Yeah,
world.
that reciprocal relationship that she
Hmm.
writes and speaks about, and I think that's ideal. But even if you don't be worried about it, don't go out with a goal or a set of expectations because all of that gets in the way of any meditative or mindful experience. Just go and, like you said, just be out there. Pay attention to what's out there.
Yeah.
It's literally that simple.
Right, right. Well, speaking of paying attention to nature,
Yeah.
you make a very provocative case for astronauts on a long haul space mission, say to Mars or beyond, where they're essentially stuck in a tin can,
Hmm.
to take a little nature with them. So, this is a 2023 paper that you wrote titled A Case for Nature in Long Haul Space Exploration. Why do you think it's so important for astronauts in particular to connect with nature? That's probably the answer is probably obvious given everything that we've just been discussing there for the past couple of minutes. But more than that, you actually prescribe some very specific routines
Yeah.
that these astronauts can engage in. What do those look like?
So fun fact about this paper. This is the first time in my career I have ever used a preprint server for feedback.
Okay.
We thought, Andy and Elliot and I thought, this is so far out there, no pun intended.
Hmm.
We've got to put this out there first to see what we're missing, right? Because I mean, come on, like you said, I mean, I teach leadership and I'm a psychological scientist. I'm a total poser in this arena, right? And so, although I will say, like, space policy is increasingly where I think I'm headed as a next step.
Mm.
But at the time, it was like, okay, this is even more out there. We need some feedback before we submit this anywhere. Who might take it? And we actually, I mentioned that because we got wonderful critical feedback on that server and from people all across the spectrum, right? Everything from like philosophers to like NASA affiliated people, like, and so I mentioned that because like one of the constant criticisms, and I mean that in a constructive way, right? In terms of peer review, in terms of feedback, one of the criticisms was, okay, but how? Like, be more specific, and have you thought about this, and have you read this, and have you looked at this? And so we tried to get that in there, and that's what resulted with us being much more prescriptive. And we asked ourselves, okay, like you said, you're in a tin can. You're stuck with people for hopefully no more than 8 months. And man, if you get on the free return trajectory, you're really stuck, right? You are going to hate these people. So what do we do? And at the same time, NASA was starting to come out with their early long-term mission results from ISS. And so we were looking at those. I was certainly reading that stuff, thinking, oh, this is actually far worse cognitively and physiologically than anyone really expected in terms of wear and tear. And that was still in a microgravity environment. So it's like, what can nature bring? Otherwise, this is all just fun pontification and it's useless. And so we started thinking, okay, for an actual mission, there can't be any weight that you're never going to convince a mission architect to add a couple 100 pounds so you can hear birds tweet.
Right.
It probably can't require any additional equipment or change to any of that equipment, right? Nothing that is going to mess with any of the mission objectives. And it ought to be readily available and as effortless as possible. So it's there on demand, right? Like a lot of our media and our streaming shows and radio and all that is. And so we started thinking, okay, and this was very much Andy's idea of, well, what if we like recommend they start to do some of the things we've been doing in our studies and like what I had done with John Jensen, who's on another set of projects of what if we like have them pipe in auditory elements? What if we could
Mm.
have them pipe in visual elements, right? All we're asking for is basically we're going to ask for these electrons. You're going to store them over here. It's not going to affect your inertia, and we're good to go. And like by that point, right, like memory storage is no longer an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot more we wanted to recommend, but we thought to start to make an argument that this is even feasible, it just has to be as unobtrusive and non-disruptive as possible to mission objectives.
Hmm.
And so that's what we recommended that, you're able to put on the monitors scenes from Earth, whatever resonates with you, right? Astronauts could make their own selections if they want, and or NASA could readily provide so much. I mean, even now, like theoretically, you should be able to get a YouTube stream at least all the way to the moon. Who cares if there's a delay? But we could do that. We could pipe in just a little bit of birdsong, which has been found to have an effect on health. And so it's super low-hanging fruit, Mike, like totally non-remarkable, but it could be a first step in helping to offset at least the cognitive degradation, which we now know pretty much certainly is going to happen over a Martian mission.
Wow. That's really important stuff.
Yeah.
And we also see glimmers of this ritual reconnection with nature in Star Trek, right?
Oh yeah, I wish there would be more of it, but Star Trek, I think since TOS there've been scenes, they've hinted at this. Obviously TNG, right? TNG, the Enterprise D had an arboretum
Yeah.
on the ship, like in the saucer side, in a massive arboretum, and in Strange New Worlds with quote unquote Starbase,
Hmm.
which they're going to have some explaining to do how that's going to change in a century. But still, they have a nice backstory of you have whole ecologies on that station, and so I mean I'm reading into it, Mike, but like for me implementing nature, like nature has always been part of it. I've always just assumed, based on those little glimmers in the episodes, that in the future in Star Trek, there wasn't a question about this. People were meaningfully able to access nature even when they were traveling the stars, right, aboard their ship. And forgive me, but I can't think of the name. I want to say it's the Ross class, but don't quote me on that. But I once had the chance with my friend Brad to interview Thomas Moroni,
Oh
who's
yeah.
designed a ton of the ships for Star Trek Online,
Hmm.
which I don't play because I have a Mac, but I like playing vicariously through listening to others and watching. And I remember we were chatting with him, and he explained his process for like designing these starships from scratch.
Hmm.
And he said, with this one, he just imagined, because it was such a large starship, he just imagined one entire deck of the saucer section would essentially be an arboretum.
Wow.
Right. And I thought, to me in Star Trek, that's always been implied, especially by the time of TNG with the post-scarcity society, where we are theoretically largely past in situ resource utilization, and we can generate it ourselves if we have a sufficient energy budget. Like, we could do that. And again, going back to the questions about colonization or whatever word to use, like, at that point, we don't have to mine. We don't have to raise crops. We bring what we need with us and thereby greater honor wherever we are.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. The kinds of activities that you suggest for near future space missions of piping in for astronauts scenes from their home planet, sounds from their home planet, maybe even smells from their home planet, reminded me as I was reading that of Saru's quarters in Star Trek Discovery, how he brings so
Gorgeous.
much of his Kelpian heritage, the nature from his homeworld, the moss, the mist in his quarters. And I was thinking, yeah, Saru definitely read that paper that Jason wrote.
I think he probably wrote a better one. That's I didn't even think of that, and that's probably the single most beautiful example of it.
So, look, I've always dreamt of being an astronaut, and I'm not there yet, and probably will never get there, as many people on Earth will never do. But I feel like, nonetheless, I can do a better job of reconnecting with the natural world. So, Jason, based on all of your thinking and research in this area of understanding how bringing nature into spaceships can help astronauts, what would you suggest for ordinary folks like myself, especially city dwellers?
That is the number one challenge, right? The majority of the world's population, slight majority, now lives in urban centers of 1 million or more. North America, it's like 82%. You never know from voting patterns, but nonetheless, there it is. Most of us are here, and many, if not most of us, live like you do, like I do, like Andy does. They live in cities and urban areas where the Bordeaux rating, the sky rating, right, is like up at 9, right? Like I look, and I've been here now. Whoa, I've lived in St. Paul and its environs, like with Minneapolis. I've lived here now like 25, oh my God, 25 years. I came for a year. It's a common story in Minnesota. And I've watched in 20 some years, I've watched our sky degrade, and this is universal. And I've got to mention, this is especially deeply more problematic for those communities who have the least. So, I mean, let's call it what it is for those black and brown communities who have been historically disenfranchised in countries like ours, who tend to live closer to the urban centers. It's even worse. They're just not healthy areas in terms of whether it's a food desert, air pollution is higher, exposure to power plants is more likely. All of these things, I mean, we know these things. Fewer animals, fewer stars in the night sky. So, what can we do? I think we do our best to get out. That's one thing. Cities like Minneapolis was designed around urban parks. It's actually rather impressive. If you've ever seen it, my wife knows the exact number because way back in the day, she actually in college worked for the park system in the inner city. And in Minneapolis, it's something like there is a park within a mile of every home in the city proper. And it's pretty cool. You know, they're not all like gorgeous parks, but they all are green and they all have trees. So if you have access, you go to the closest park or green space you can. But also, now that everyone has devices, whether laptops or phones, it is so easy to get online and utilize what Peter Kahn and others call technologically mediated nature as a quick fix. And what the research says is it's not as good as nature exposure, but it's still good. And
Hmm.
so if you can get out anywhere, if you live in a city that has a river running through it, which is almost every urban center in the world, right? Spend a little time there if there's a park there or if there's a pier there. If you can get to a park, you go to a park. Even just going outside to look up, even if you can see, like I think right now Saturn's up in the evening, whatever you can see, that can be beneficial. And if not, stream it on the computer, stream it on the television, stream it on your phone, and don't worry about it being enough.
Hmm.
Any bit is probably going to be beneficial.
That's very wise. Wow.
If I may, I do want to mention one more person really quickly because we never
Hmm.
got to him, but it's important that the world knows. So, Elliot Floyd
Okay.
was on all of the papers we've talked about together
Right.
just now.
Yes.
And I just want to mention Elliot is a remarkably good, my God, is he intelligent person. He was deeply involved in all of this from the earliest days. I met him when he was one of my master's students of all things, but Elliot is now wrapping up his PhD at Clemson. And he's just one of these people who is going to around these areas, and he's in RPLS, Recreation, Parks and Leisure Studies, which is not only a thing, to my great surprise several years ago, but deeply scientifically grounded. Um, he reminds me a lot of you.
Hmm.
He's just going to take over the world in his niche, and he's going to be unstoppable. And he's just this deeply intelligent, insightful person. So we never talked about that because, Andy and I had this long-term conversation, but I would be remiss with not in not saying, Elliot, his thinking and his fingers and his passion has been in all of these. So thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. I can't wait to get to meet Elliot one day. Sounds like an amazing person.
Great guy.
Jason, thank you so much for helping me understand and walking us all through those three papers. With the remainder of our time today, I want to turn to a fabulous new book called Second Star to the Right: Essays on Leadership in Star Trek, which you co-edited with your colleague Aaron Peterson.
Yeah.
What spurred you two to put together such an anthology of essays on leadership in Star Trek?
Well, first of all, thank you for contributing a chapter. A
Oh, you're very welcome.
wonderful chapter. We are so thrilled to have that. Um, in summer of 23, our first book came out, and we wrote about basic leadership skills through the lens of Star Trek. As we were wrapping that up, it started to really hit us. Who the hell are we to write about leadership skills? And so we wrote a book on humility in leadership through the lens of Captain Pike, which I'm very happy to say we are now waiting for the cover art,
Whew,
and it's coming out sometime probably in the spring, upcoming
awesome.
spring.
Congrats.
Thank you. That had a very long errant peer review process. And so that just kind of stayed in that process for a while. But as we finished writing and revising the book on humility and leadership, I mean, we were drinking our own Kool-Aid pretty deeply, and it's like, okay, but still, seriously, who the hell are we to write a book on leadership, much less being humble? And we're telling people, okay, here's a set of skills, mind-body skills and perspectives. Here's the science behind how to do this and do it well and be well. And the inescapable conclusion was there are so many people who know so much more than we do. I wonder if we could do an anthology and invite people to inform us, and thereby hopefully a lot of readers. And that resulted in the book to which you contributed, Second Star to the Right.
I think that's beautiful, right? That living the humility, principle is to invite other voices in and have
Yeah,
a diversity of perspectives. Who the hell are you to write a but you are a
yeah,
professor
don't
of
know.
leadership. That
Yeah, I
I
know,
can I
but
can tell
but
you that.
that doesn't I mean, I'm grateful for it, right?
Yeah.
But that's still we all know a lot of experts who aren't.
Mm.
And I've never considered myself an expert in anything. Knowledgeable about some things, certainly, but expert, no way. And then something squishy like leadership. Mm-mm, mm-mm.
Wow. That is some real humility there because I can tell you I've learned so much by reading your work and in leadership. And as I step into more and more leadership roles as my career develops, I keep thinking about the principles that I've learned from you and Aaron, and now I get to learn from all of the wonderful voices in this anthology. Just a couple more questions about the book. So, who do you think is the intended audience for this book, and what do you hope they'll take away from it?
Aaron and I, with all of our books, our fundamental conceit is it's pure Star Trek in that there should be a seat for everyone at the table. And so we want any reader to have that experience, but we aimed for as broad a scope as possible. And so, right, we have contributions from people like you, like astrobiology and planetary science, talking about leadership. We have an editor from Star Trek Picard. We have retired military. We have a judge. We have everyone in between. And that was really, really intentional. We thought it was important, since this hadn't really been done like this before, to bring as diverse a set of perspectives as possible so that theoretically anyone who was interested in leadership and or Star Trek on their own merits could pick this up and find something of benefit.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Just one last question for you, Jason. I feel like we're going to have you back on the podcast once your humility, the humble leadership book based around Captain Pike comes out, and I can't wait to read that. But you did write an essay, the very last essay of this anthology,
Yeah.
titled Humble Leadership and the Grand Captains of Star Trek, maybe sort of like as a preview for your upcoming book next spring. And you explain humble leadership really well in this section where you write that, quote, humble leadership is not a zero-sum game. Indeed, it is quite the opposite. To lead humbly requires us to recognize our strengths, our weaknesses, and opportunities to grow across the breadth of our careers. So my final question for you, Jason, is how are you still growing as a leader?
Oh boy, what a good question. As a leader, I don't have a ready response to that. I hope I'm still growing as a leader. Man, I think the more people with whom I work, the more people with whom I write, the more people, honestly, the more students I mentor, I find that very humbling. So I mentioned to you off air before we started recording, my colleague John Jensen and I, we just literally yesterday morning presented on some other very tangentially related research, and it was really well received. And I wasn't expecting that. I left feeling so much gratitude about that. Like, okay, there are different ways to handle this. And for me, my thought process is anything like that, whether things go well or whether they hit the proverbial fan, I think there's something to learn. And if kind of like you say in your chapter, Mike, like at the end of the day, isn't leadership really about teaching and mentoring? Like truly at the end of the day, right? I think a good leader, I don't mean one who brings in the bucks, but a good leader, someone who really makes a difference and makes a difference in others' lives, they ought to be listening a lot. And their first question ought to be, okay, for whomever I'm leading, what do they need from me? What do they need structurally, organizationally now? Right? What I need may or may not ever be relevant, but what can I offer them now? And then hopefully a few times later, I've learned more. Right at the end of the day, I think leadership is like any other learned skill. Some people are truly innately better at it. I was never one of them. But I think it's the issue of experience, right? That's where wisdom comes from. The research tells us that. Literally, the research tells us that wisdom is the application of knowledge through the lens of experience. And I think that's what leadership requires, right? Whatever your venue.
Wow.
So I hope I'm growing. I appreciate the question. That's going to make me think all day now. I think I'm growing. I hope I'm growing. And I hope I'm becoming stronger and more compassionate through it.
Yeah. That's excellent, Jason. I want to give you this opportunity now to plug any projects of yours that you think our audience should know about and to tell people where they can follow you on the internet.
Oh, thanks. So you can follow me at my relatively new website. I thought, yeah, it's probably time. Profkaufman.com.
Cool.
Literally as it sounds. And in terms of new projects, so Aaron Peterson and I, our latest project was just accepted by our editor, Vernon Press. So we have an open call for chapter proposals. And there's plenty of time. This call will go through the end of February to accommodate winter break. And just to be kind of a nice simmer, we really want some good chapters here. This is all about failure. Every one of us has dealt with it, and if we're successful, we will continue to deal with failure. And we all ought to be talking about this because
Yeah.
it's like a wonderfully kept not secret. And so this is entitled Beyond the Next Star: The Importance of Failure in Star Trek. And you can just email me and or Aaron, and we will gladly receive your chapter proposal. You can see from the call it's very straightforward. We give you some preliminary guidance. We're hoping you might submit something because we'd love to see it, and plenty of time, right? And we're hoping that we can better open up, if you will, the failure space, right? The parameters around being acceptable to talk candidly in and out of the professions about failure, even when sometimes you just fail.
Wow. I can't wait to get my thoughts together around what I want to submit to that. It's going to be another great anthology. And I can't let you go without mentioning your podcast, Dice in Mind. So please remind the audience about Dice in Mind.
Thanks, Mike. My dear friend Brad Brown and I, we co-host Dyson Mind, which is a super geeky podcast. I mean, we make you look cool when it comes to topics. It's a really geeky podcast. We basically are an interview show, and we talk to people in and widely adjacent to tabletop role-playing games, or just people who like to play games or like to geek out and might not be in that space. It's all about how to use those games to look at real life and vice versa, to have fun, to have really cool conversations, but also to kind of look at the whole genre as literature that just kind of can inspire and enlighten.
Fantastic. Well, Professor Jason Kaufman, thank you once again for being on Strange New Worlds. I can't wait for the next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wong.
One thing I cannot stop thinking about is the idea that we need a brand new word for the style of human habitation that we wish to see beyond Earth. As Jason and I discussed, the word colonization carries around such harmful historical baggage. And I think I can speak for most of us here when I say we don't want to repeat those mistakes or carry those attitudes into space. The language we choose to use shapes our ways of thinking and acting, and it may be time to invent a whole new term for a whole new kind of being. The act of being in space, off-world, encountering the endless unknown. If you have any ideas, you can let me know. Find me on Blue Sky at MikeY, that's MIQUAI. And if you enjoyed listening to today's show, please leave a rating or a review, or just tell a friend about Strange New Worlds. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you out there.
I've been able now to freelance on two of the books published with Star Trek Adventures, right? The
Oh,
official
cool.
RPG.
Yeah.
Just little bits. Only one of them's been announced, but it's like, oh, that's so cool to be that close. You know, I can die a happy man with that.